Okay, so right now I am just getting everything set up. Just give me a couple moments. Okay, yeah, just if you are watching and it's live, just give me a couple more moments. If you're watching and it's not live, then yeah, just like skip ahead on the timeline. And it looks like everything is set up. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so yeah, hopefully this time the stream shouldn't just randomly close out. But let's go ahead and get started. So this is going to be kind of like the last stream where I talk and draw at the same time. But what we're going to be talking about is mages. So in the Omnivermis mythos, there's multiple universes, univermises, different timelines. And note that this is going to be only for Univermis-Alpha, that magic works differently in like alternate timelines. So here is some other art that I did that's like different shape-shifting forms mages can take on. And then, as you're probably familiar with, there is also this page that I drew on one of the live streams before I did sound. So that's that. Hold on. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So, what is magic in the Omnivermis mythos? So, to understand a little bit about it, about what the basis of magic is, there's two magic systems that are almost entirely separated from each other. There's the first magic system, which is psi, and then that's like physically separated interaction. And basically what that is, that's where you have certain tissue like as part of your nervous system, and then it lets you use your mind. You can like pick up objects. You can send messages outward, and then your spine right here acts as actually like a radio antenna, so you can receive telepathic messages. But anyway, that's the other one. That's not what we're interested in today. We're going to be talking about biomystic magic. Like, I guess it'd just be true magic is what it's called in Univermis. So magic isn't necessarily like psi, where it's something completely abstract or something that couldn't exist, because magic is very physical in the Omnivermis mythos. So we use the symbol to denote magic. It's got like 3 legs and like a head. But anyway, how it's like how magic is actually spread, then we have to go a little bit into the history of how this stuff works. So back like way before medieval times, in at least in the timeline, there was the antenymph known as the striped man. Now, if you haven't heard too much about what antenymphs are in the Omnivermis mythos, then I encourage you to read the website. That's boring. You're watching a stream, so I'll just talk about it. That would be much easier. So remember at the very start on the channel introduction, I had talked about how the timeline of the universe is actually a giant cosmic worm. Now the worm has, like all organisms, an immune system. Those are wherever minions come from. Those are minions of the worm, because vermis means worm in Latin. But there are also certain parts of the worm that have significance. So for example, in the nervous system, there are eyes. Eyes are important, as you can tell, just because how else would you see, how else would you navigate? And there are antennae. So the antenna of the worm, each one kind of has its own being associated with it. And those beings are known as antenymphs. Now, there are exactly 10 or 9, depending on the Univermis. In Univermis-Alpha, there are 9. So they're just kind of like these cosmic beings, and they don't necessarily have to have something that they're in charge of, but they often do. So this is what I'm drawing right now. I'm drawing the antenymph of magic. His name is the Striped Man, and we'll get to that why in a minute, but it'll also become apparent just from me drawing him. Now, the reason why he's relevant is, and why I had to talk about the cosmology for a little bit, is because whenever magic entered the timeline, it wasn't like, oh, magic got invented, then it got refined, then there were mages in the future. No, that's not how it worked. It was, there's the timeline, and then outside of the timeline, the antenymph, known as the Striped Man, who is the patron of magic, he was like, okay, now I have magic designed. Where should I place it in the timeline? I think I'll put it here. And that, like on the timeline, that where he actually entered magic into the timeline, that is like pre-medieval times, just after the fall of the Roman Empire. But that's not when it was created, because it was created outside of time. It was just introduced to the timeline. So to humans, it would look like magic got created just before medieval times, like the high medieval ages. But it's actually far, far older. And one could argue it's actually from outside the timeline originally. The idea just got like actually created physically during kind of like that weird time between the fall of the Roman Empire and the start of the Middle Ages. So yeah, right now I'm going to be drawing the Striped Man. Now he's called that, if you've ever heard of the creature known as a bobbit worm. They're essentially these, well, they're worms, obviously, from the name, but they have these crazy jaws that come out, and they've got like the worm body, but they have these jaws, and they can grab fish, they can grab whatever, and they bury themselves in the dirt, and then they like they go up and grab the fish. So that was kind of the color scheme inspiration for this. I don't actually have colored pencils on me, so you're not really going to be able to see that. I do want to mention he's like green and black. So if there's a part where I don't have anything drawn, just kind of assume that's like a greenish color, like fleshy green. And then if it's actually like shaded in, just kind of assume that's like a blackened color. So anyway, I've said that the striped man is the creator of magic, but what is magic? Like physically, what are its effects? How does it work? So magic is essentially a means of morphing one's body. And what I mean by that, I don't mean like slight changes to the body, like, oh, maybe you get taller, maybe your arms can stretch out. The changes take time, like a couple of minutes for skilled mages, probably like a couple of hours for starters, like people who are just newly learning magic. And you can't just start shapeshifting. There's a very specific thing that needs to happen in order for mages to gain their powers, and that is they need to be infected by a virus called magic flu. So basically, the striped man created basically this cosmic law where it's like coded into the universe. If someone has this set of DNA, then that means, so it's like, you got DNA here. If this chunk is the Biomystic Codex, which we'll get to that a little bit more. We'll talk about it more in like just a couple of minutes. But essentially, the string of DNA has to be in your genome, has to be in your cells. And if you have it, then you can do magic. But the problem is that would mean only creatures that were naturally born with it could actually do magic. And that's boring. That's not fun. I didn't want that to be the setting because that has other implications that I just don't really like, where it would be like only a select few could use magic. I wanted it to be available to everyone, or at least everyone who the Verminions and the Antennates deem worthy. So if we know the magic is DNA based, and we know you need to have it in your body, then how does that actually happen? How is magic gained by an organism? This was the question that many like scholars throughout medieval times kind of pondered. Now, within the paradox orthodoxy, which that's its own discussion, that's its own topic. The paradox orthodoxy, it basically started out as a training to prepare people in case they got chosen by Verminions or Antennates to actually go like on time travel quests to go do something. And then eventually it just became like documenting everything weird and time travel related, documenting potential paradoxes, hence the name, the paradox orthodoxy. But anyway, so they didn't really understand where did magic come from. However, at modern day, it becomes apparent. So remember we said you need to have a certain strand of DNA, a certain gene, And it's like if an organism has this, then boom, they gain magical abilities. And humans, like your baseline human, they can't shapeshift, they can't change forms. That's not really a common thing within humankind. The only way that you could have such a trait would be if there was some way to just go in and like edit every cell in your body, which by human standards is impossible even within the Omnivermis mythos. So that just makes the mystery even more and more confusing. But here's the thing. You know what has DNA and what can act as a delivery system to spread DNA? And you might be able to guess it based on what I'm drawing, but I want to draw it first just for the sake of this conversation. The flu. And that's what I talked about magic flu earlier. So what happens is the virus, the DNA is encapsulated into a virus. And once this was manufactured by the striped man, basically he made the DNA, put it in a virus, and then he has this goo that's just laced with the virus, and he spreads it. He spreads it all across Europe, Northern Europe, and that's like the prototype of magic. And then he experiments, every once in a while, it's like a random family of heroes gets some shape-shifting powers, it's all cool. But things really started to ramp up during a little bit later in the timeline, whenever at that point, not at that point in time, but the striped man chose to introduce the version 2.0 of magic flu, like a second mutated version of the virus. He chose to release it into Europe, just like spread it everywhere. So imagine it's yearly flu season and everybody who gets sick suddenly gains the ability to shapeshift. That's going to be pretty chaotic, to say the least. And you can imagine that would have some pretty crazy effects just on civilization if suddenly everybody became like indestructible people that could change form at will. That's going to be it's going to result in like robberies and crime going up, probably people going and like assassinating the local royalty so then they can try and take the throne. It was just flung into chaos, pretty much all of Europe, and even like the surrounding areas in Western Asia and like the Middle East, and maybe even a little bit of Northern Africa. So that was kind of like an unstable variation of magic flu. Spread way too easily, gave way too many people powers, and this would eventually in history lead to an event known as the Crusade on Monsters. And that's where the Crusade on Monsters is really where the history gets interesting. But hold on a minute. Gotta go look at some reference. So, got a line and then a line. And then yeah, I've been kind of focusing on the talking part. I do still want to be able to get some drawing in. But anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, so magic flu, it was spreading all across Europe. That was bad. Then the time came, and this was really the start of the era of champions. So champions were essentially They didn't even have to be time travelers, but the Verminions and the Antenims would choose people who were fitting and send them on quests to go destroy these monsters. I'm talking about like people who went insane from being able to shapeshift into anything, and then they eventually just kind of lost their humanity. Not in the sense that they weren't intelligent, but they lost all morality until they were just a menace to society and to humanity in general, and they just had to be taken out. It was a very, I'll say, controversial time. Like, oh, well, why can't you just restore them to what they were? But even if you take away their ability to shapeshift, they'd still be, most likely they wouldn't want to change back into human. So then you just have all these giant mutant people walking around. And even then they probably wouldn't want to, after tasting the unimaginable power of the unstable strain of magic flu, then they would want, they would still go about their ways, which just isn't good. You can imagine this would be pretty bad of a situation. So the champions and heroes who were selected, obviously they weren't given magic flu because then they would most likely just defect. So instead, they were given special artifacts to help them, to compensate for the fact that they couldn't really physically compete with the mages. So because they were given these artifacts, that's where you get people like King Archer, which is similar to King Arthur from Arthurian legends in the real world, but also like totally different in his origin. Is he's actually just some guy from the future that got sent back to the past and given like a special living sword known as Caliburn, which is, if you don't know, that's one of the names for Excalibur. That's like a more true translation of it. Or not translation, but like speech. A more true, more accurate pronunciation is what I'm trying to say. So you got King Archer, he goes around and he's part of the crusade on monsters, or the war on the monstrous. Now that eventually ends, and because that version of Magic Flu was so horribly unstable and so detrimental, then the Striped Man is like, okay, I'm going to give the people some time to recover. I'm not going to plop the next version directly right after those events. I'm going to walk down the timeline a little bit, put it at a couple decades later. Now, some of the mages did actually survive. Some of the bad ones did. Like they became the giants, which are basically feral humans who kind of like gave up their humanity. And by that, when I say giants, I mean in medieval times, because there are also giants from the future who are completely different. Forgot where I was going with that a little bit. Now, one thing that's kind of unrelated is I don't necessarily think I'm the best at drawing humanoids. So if anyone does have, like anyone on the Discord, if you do have advice on drawing humanoids, I would actually appreciate that kind of a lot if you would like to share any advice about that. Anyway, getting back to the subject of what was happening. So we got this gap in time where there's really nothing that happens. But then there's a refined version of magic flu that starts spreading around. You know, the striped man gives someone a vial and it has goo and it's like contains magic flu in it. The point is they get infected. So that, as you would expect, it's kind of burned into the memory of the population of anyone in the area that, hey, magic is bad. There's going to be all these shape-shifting people that lose their minds and try and take over. So naturally, they weren't very fond of the idea. But King Archer, during his reign, like he reigned for a little bit, then he got skipped forward in time, and then his reign continued. So he could actually, like, if he made a law in the past, then he could time travel to the future, like 10 years in the future, and see how that law actually affected people. Well, I gotta think about this hand anatomically. What does a hand look like? So anyway, going back to the idea of the people aren't necessarily open. They're not very receptive to these new mages that are created using the third version of Magic Flu. So just to recap, there's like proto magic, which is really like it works, and there were some powers that got experimented with, and that was the Biomystic Codex at one time, and that had experimental abilities. And then we get to like the unstable version. So then we have, we'll call it unstable magic flu. And then, you know, that one's like really bad. Whenever someone got infected, they had all the powers, like all the kinds of shape-shifting. That's part of why it was so detrimental whenever there were all of those people who actually received those abilities. If they just had like one or two shape-shifting abilities, it probably would have been not as bad. But imagine suddenly an entire town of angry villagers just gets the ability to turn into giant towering creatures with the strength of 10 men that can take spears and use them like arrows and hurl them across and pick up boulders and all that stuff. You know, all the stuff giants are shown doing in movies and kind of popular culture. You can imagine it wouldn't go over well. Oops, I messed that up a little bit. Okay, whatever. So then, like I said, it had all the powers. And that, yeah, it was just like pure chaos. So for the third version, the third iteration of Magic Flu, it wasn't like necessarily one specific it wasn't just one strain. So remember how I had said that there's a Biomystic Codex, and that's a strength. That's like a length of DNA. It's a gene. But the thing about genes is that even within a gene, there can be different subregions. So let's say this one says gives ability to use magic. This one would be like terminal genetic code. Instead of having in here just be all the powers, what happened was for the third iteration of magic, it got subdivided, got broken down. So there are a variety of possible abilities. There's shapeshifting, which is where you can basically take any tissue that's already part of your body and allocate it towards growth. And then these growths are almost like neoplasm. You can grow like keratin where it wouldn't normally grow. So keratin is the stuff in your fingernails and your hair and form like spines. You could like have spikes coming out of your shoulders and stuff. But that wouldn't be like that would be an isolated ability. You can change your form in terms of what you look like, but you can't just get bigger. So there's shape-shifting, which is growing features in spots maybe they wouldn't be and kind of rearranging things. Also, you can't just grow things that you don't have. So for example, if a human was infected with Magic Flu and say they had the ability to shapeshift, they could grow like big spikes out of their back, and they could even grow like extra arms with stingers on the end, like kind of spiky shapes, like woo. But the thing is, they couldn't have the venom. That's not possible because humans don't produce venom. Humans can produce keratin and nails and bones really well. You know, we have it inside of us. Humans do not produce venom. And since that's not something that we have naturally occurs in our bodies, then any mages who have the ability to shapeshift, they can't just get new things. They can only take existing tissues and make them in different shapes. So while one could grow out maybe like bat-like wings, they couldn't grow feathers on wings because humans don't have feathers. We just don't have the DNA to do that. This doesn't provide, Magic Flu doesn't provide DNA for making new things. It provides a DNA for manipulating things you already have, different biological materials. And that's like one of the key things to understand here, is they can't just do anything. And here I'm just adding some designs to the striped man, make him look a little bit visually interesting. So with this, I know I kind of went on a tangent there and I was ranting about how the mechanics work, which we haven't even covered the mechanics of how you're actually able to gain the biomass. But there would be essentially each one of these little stretches would be its own thing. So like maybe this one would be shape shifting. This one would be size shifting, which is simply getting bigger or smaller. And then maybe this one would be, I don't know off the top of my head, because there are some other ones. There are some other abilities. There's one where you can control omniplasm, which is essentially a golden liquid that can form into portals. So the same way if you're blowing bubbles as a kid, like let's say you have a bubble wand, and then, you know, like the soap goes in here, you would essentially build a giant frame, and then kind of like a fountain, you'd have a fountain at the top, and then it would gush out omniplasm, and that would form kind of a film, like a film of soap, but a film of omniplasm instead. And then that would actually create a portal where you could go inside and go to another place that has the same size and shaped frame. So omniplasm is actually a living substance. It's part of the cosmic worm, but that would be like another thing. Again, magic is manipulating biological matter. So for this one, we have those three examples. Instead of having just all the powers, now there's different variants with the entirety of the Biomystic Codex. Because there's more powers than this. It's like longer. But it would be, maybe it's just shape shifting that goes to this one. Or maybe it's just size shifting that goes to this one over here. Or maybe there can be one that has shape shifting and size shifting, but not omniplasm manipulation. So that would be really where these different strains come along. They're just variants of what powers are contained within what virus. So let's say this one is shape shifting. And then maybe there could be one that maybe like elongated out a little bit. And then this could be size shifting. And there are other ones. I wrote them down on the website. I'm just using these ones as examples because I'm not going to pull up the list while on the live stream, because then my computer might act out a little bit. And maybe there's one that has like weird knobs. But yeah, the virus, it's not like malicious in nature. It simply acts as a delivery system. The virus just acts to get the Biomystic Codex inside your cells, and then your body will naturally fight it off and you'll heal. So it's not like you're going to die from the infection immediately. Now there is a short amount of time where your body has to like basically recondition itself to having these abilities, because again, they're not natural abilities. Like humans don't regularly have those powers. So there is actually a little bit of a time period where the person is very vulnerable. They can experience hallucinations, internal bleeding, and if they're not, like the virus isn't compatible with their body, if the strain doesn't align with their cells properly and it doesn't mix, then the person can die of magic flu. So that's why magic flu is only given out by the striped man to, it's only given to the mages who are worthy of it, and it's designed for them specifically. So if you were to get the magic flu from someone else and it was designed for them instead, then yeah, it wouldn't end well, I'll say. Either you'd end up with some of the powers and you'd have been sick for a really long time, or you would just die. So I'm thinking, so like this shapeshifting, this is size shifting. This one's got those little knobs. This one's got spikes. Maybe this one's shapeshifting and size shifting. Now I know so far we've just been going over the mechanics of how the magic system works, but I do want to be clear. In this stream, we will eventually get to drawing some actual mages, like examples of what they look like. I just want to cover the basics first. Oh, and then here we can make him holding something cool, like I'm not quite sure what would be something cool for him to be holding. Maybe like, because all this stuff is microscopic, so if I just drew him holding one of these in his hand, that would definitely look a little bit weird, because it would be like giant when it's not actually supposed to be. I think I'm gonna have him like using psi to levitate a glob of fluid, and this glob of fluid would eventually be gifted to someone as like a special drink, and then that's how they would get magic flu inside of them. So yeah, and then maybe there's like little globs coming off of it. So this isn't quite how I was expecting this to look, but we'll call it okay for now. Those would be like little globules of slime or something like that. Maybe like phlegm. And because well, actually, I don't think I'm going to draw the feet. I think I'm going to draw like clouds to make it, maybe there's some like kind of ethereal setting where he appeared to someone. Those don't look quite like clouds, but I would say they're good enough. Like you can kind of tell they're clouds. Can you tell they're clouds? Uh, I think you could. Maybe if I make them go like this. Yeah, that looks not how I was expecting. But we can work with that. Let's go ahead and give him some extra lines. Because he is called the Striped Man, because I modeled him to look after the antennae, look like the antennae of bobbit worms. So again, I was talking about that's like an actual species of worm in the real world. And yeah, I think it's just fun to use real color schemes and real stripe patterns. So the antennae are probably the most faithful part, and the rest of the body I'm just doing that way because I think it looks cool. That doesn't really look like stripes, but I'm going to stick with it. So yeah, maybe that's what he could look like in at least one setting, maybe appearing to someone. And I imagine that's like smoke clouds, maybe for dramatic effect, I guess. Because I imagine whenever something as powerful as an antenna, where there's only 9 of them in existence for Univermis-Alpha, and they can reshape entire galaxies if they so choose, I imagine there would be, from them taking on such a small form, there would be some interesting effects. Maybe reality warps around them a little bit for them to be able to condense into such a small thing where it's like only the height of a person. A person would be like that tall, for reference. And also, one thing that I didn't note is the striped man has sometimes he can just grow out of his skin. He can grow like this encrusted armor that looks like it's made out of some shiny metallic material. It's actually just shell. But yeah, he can like armor himself up, and then it's going to be a crazy battle whatever he's fighting is, because for him to actually need to fight something instead of just having time travelers do it or giving people a time quest or sending out verminions to take care of it, if this guy's going to fight something, something's going to go down. And yeah. So anyway, here's the striped man. Patron and 10. Whoops, I completely misspelled that. Looks like we're just gonna maybe restart writing that. The striped man. Patron and 10th of magic. Ooh, maybe this can be like a DNA strand. Anyways, I promised you guys that I would draw some actual mages. So let's get into how, like, so we know there's a virus. We know that there's this. And let's ping on size shifting just for a moment. If a human is just gonna double their height, then that would mean they're gaining mass. They're gonna be heavier. They have more physical material. So where does it come from? That goes back to in the very first magic video I had made talking about psi. I mentioned that people have things called quintessences. Now here was an art where some of this is failed art, some of it is like this was the thumbnail for the video. People have something called a quintessence, where it's essentially like in the most abstract way, each person is like a cell. They have the nucleus, which contains their consciousness and their memories and like their core beliefs and what makes that person a person. But that produces kind of peripheral parts of this thing. It's almost like their soul. But this material, it's called vitoplasm because it's like supposed to sound like cytoplasm, like it's a cell. But this is basically fuel. Now you can use it as fuel to accomplish psi activities. What you can also do is what the Biomystic Codex lets you do. You take parts of your vitoplasm, parts of your quintessence, and essentially you grab off a little glob. And if you'll notice from the picture, you can see there's like all those partitions and little subdivisions. Each one of those little globs could theoretically be removed by that person. And if they have the Biomystic Codex, then they could take that glob that they've just removed from their quintessence and transmute it into physical flesh. And that is how mages are able to shapeshift into this. The magic system is basically metabolism based. So they need to eat physical food that gives them enough energy to keep them alive, right? Actually, hold on. Let me draw this out because it's going to be interesting. So you got the human, right? And the human eats food. So you got the human and you got food, right? And the human eats food to be alive. Pretty simple. But then if they're a magical human, hold on just a moment. If they're a magical human, then they would also need food to be able to like grow tissue, to size shift or to shape shift. But then they have this tissue, right? That they've just metabolized part of their vitoplasm into physical growth. But now that they have more tissue, this tissue needs to be able to eat food to stay alive. So that means not only do they use food to keep them alive, then they're using part of their vitoplasm to change into tissue, and that's like their magical powers. But then they need to eat extra calories, extra food to sustain that tissue that now they have created. Now they can actually take existing tissue and turn it into vitoplasm and use it later. That's where you get the idea that mages and wizards are like really skinny and malnourished. They're very emaciated because they've been using all of their body's natural reserves of nutrients and putting it towards magic. So, because it costs actual nutrients to be able to change things between vitoplasm and tissue. And then it can also cost vitoplasm to change things between vitoplasm and tissue. So no matter what you do, yes, you can like shuffle it around however you want. But no matter what you do, you're still going to be losing some energy from doing the activity and just energy due to heat loss, like how metabolism normally works. And this diagram could definitely be improved. I was just drawing that in the moment. Well, let's say that there is, let's say there's like, we want to draw an actual mage. Now, because they're limited by human psychology, a lot of the times mages need to be symmetrical. Like they could turn one hand into like a big mace, and then they could turn one hand into something that's like has claws. But that would still be symmetrical. You know, they've still got two arms. I'm talking about like growing extra arms out of their back or like wings or something. They usually need to be symmetrical because that's just how the human mind works. But yeah, like I said, we can get drawing some actual human mages. And a lot of the times, like the majority of mages do end up becoming somewhat villainous. So yeah, it's like, then there's other mages that stay true to their, like actually being humanity and maintaining like morals and ethics. So those ones often are the only ones who can fight the corrupt mages. And then in the future, like post-apocalyptic future, then that's where you get people like the Baron, who is a mage that can like grow out insect wings. And they're not actual insect wings because you can't use the tissue. They're more like just a bunch of cartilage in a straight direction. And then on his back, he's got like some extra bones. And then those serve as anchoring points for those muscles to attach. Then the wing comes off of it. But let's try drawing a mage from whenever there was proto-magic. And it was like during medieval times, and they were going around the countryside terrorizing people. So I'm going to imagine this guy probably grew out some additional arms because why not? Yeah, so this is definitely going to be like one of the villainous ones. And also one trend is mages tend to look very human-like, even when they are changed into some other form. But once we start getting more and more towards the deep future, then they become less and less human-like, which is an interesting phenomenon but we'll be able to explore that more in future videos. And also one thing is, a lot of the time mages will use, like if they're going to keep their human hands while transformed, they're just going to use random objects in their vicinity. So like maybe this was some roots of a tree, like a small tree, and that got uprooted for the purposes of battle. Now, most of the little scraggly roots would have broken off. There's still a little bit left. And this would be used as a mace, right? Because where the roots split off, then now it's blunt force. Like you can inflict blunt force trauma with those little knobs. And then let's say that the end with all the branches has maybe been sharpened into like a big, I'm thinking like a big, maybe serrated spike or stake. And I do actually have a timeline for the creation of Magic Flu and all that other stuff. That's on the website. And since I don't remember all the dates off the top of my head, I'm not going to discuss all of them here. But let's see if we can draw this mage. One of the villain mages from like the early medieval ages. Villain mage from the medieval age. And I'm thinking, just for fun, let's give him like some growths on his back, maybe like an extra arm. I'm thinking maybe this extra arm could have like a spike at the end. And when I say extra arm, again, humans like to stay symmetrical, so it's actually going to be an extra pair of arms. The other one, I think, is probably going to come down from here. So how many joints is it going to have? It's going to have the joint here, so 1, 2, and the shoulder. So I'm thinking if this one is coming off the body, there to there, it would probably have like a joint right here. And then that can make it turn in this direction. Because 1, 2, 3. So then we'll get 1, 2. Now, how would these extra arms actually function? Well, on this guy, they're too short. They're not actually going to reach out from his back and stab over. So, kind of like if this is psi, then let's just draw a short little diagram of a magic guy. So we got this guy, right? Yes, from his back, he could grow out like giant arms, like big spiderish arms. And then he could crawl around on them. Maybe like his normal arms turn into these blade things. Maybe they're a little bit serrated. And then I guess his legs would probably need to grow in proportion too, just so he doesn't fall over. But once they get so big, instead of growing like thicker legs to stand up straight and not fall over, they can just grow extra limbs out their back and crawl around like giant spider menaces. Because yes, Spider-Man is a menace. But that's not what I was meaning to imply. That just came to me. But then you could also have like a person that's just normal size as opposed to being really tall like this. And whenever mages are growing out wings, they definitely don't want to make the wings, they don't want to grow their bodies while growing wings, because a bigger body means more weight. So they'd be like, they wouldn't do both at the same time. They'd be like either growing wings or growing growing tall, but never at the same time, because then you just have extra weight. You'd be like kind of, that the extra weight wouldn't help you fly. You definitely lose some aerodynamic qualities there. Oh yeah, and then some arms. I'll make the arms a little bit longer, because then longer arms means that you can land and push off better. And this is actually to scale. So for a human to be able to fly, you need a wingspan of like 15 to 20 feet, which that's like a lot. So if this guy's like 5 feet tall and he's that tall, then we got 1, 2, 3, 4. So these wings are about to scale. And I do have actually a system I'm working on of classifying mages. Out of giants, you have lengths where they're tall and lanky. Those are like maybe up to 10 feet. Then you have leans where they're like 10 to 15 feet, 10 to 20 feet. And then you have colossi, which are 20 feet and taller. Those numbers aren't finalized, by the way, so don't think those are canon. Those are just my current head canon, but they're not like real canon. But anyway, so I was saying that these arms wouldn't actually be useful because they're not long enough to support. And like, think about if you're a guy here, right? And then if you're a mage and this guy's coming at you, let's say this guy has a big sword, right? He's like coming at you, trying to get you. You're not going to want an arm like that and an arm like that. Maybe in close combat you could, and if you were holding a sword here, that could work. But if you don't have anything around you, like any trees you could uproot if you got really big, then you're going to want long, disjointed limbs to either help you like run or lunge forward, or just form them into spikes at the end, like kind of horns. Humans don't have horns, but what you could do is you could take bone and cover it in keratin. That would about replicate the effect, because that's basically what a horn is anatomically. But then they could like skewer things, or at least fight the sword, have a little bit more of a fighting chance. Metal still does damage them. And then hold on. But yeah, so here are some mage arms. Like this one, it's got like 3 segments, but the reason it does is because the first 2 segments are like if you were normally holding a sword. This is in the same angle if you were holding a sword. It's just like your hand turned into the sword. And then this one's like a big shield. But one thing that they can do is they can make their hand into like a crossbow and then like snap their fingers off and use them as arrows and then regenerate the fingers. Because mages, they can regenerate and all sorts of stuff. You would imagine that makes them very hard to actually like finish them off, to kill them. And that's definitely true. So it's like, how do you fight a mage? Well, one thing that you could do is you could use chemicals. Chemical warfare is always going to be your friend when you're fighting some sort of thing that can instantly regenerate. The chemicals wouldn't fight the regeneration. Instead, they would act to disorient the giant, because their senses, the giant or the mage, but then their senses are going to be like way enhanced whenever they morph out. So you definitely be able to fight them a little bit better if you would like fight them better if they're disoriented. Another thing you could do is use fire to fight them. Because think about it, if you like shoot someone with a bullet or you slice them with a sword, then the mage can just heal that wound. It's pretty easy. But if you burn it, then the skin is cauterized. So then they have to break down that skin into vitoplasm, then use the vitoplasm to actually regenerate. And again, that's going to use up some of it. So you can like wear them down with fire. Another thing is electricity is a big thing to fight mages and giants with. Because think about it. They have this giant nervous system because they've gotten really big. So that would mean, just like by following that logic of the nervous system is controlling a larger body, then the human nervous system is going to lag behind a little bit. And that means that if you like electrocuted them enough, then that could potentially shut down regions of the body, or it could just like knock them out. You know how electricity can give people heart attacks and stuff like that. I'm thinking this guy, maybe he's like holding someone. Now his arm wouldn't be hold on, I gotta like redraw this. Okay, so he wouldn't be holding a person, and the person wouldn't be like, oh no, help me, I'm stuck up here. That's just way too big. That's not how giants work in this. Instead, it wouldn't be like picking a person up and holding them in your palm. It would be more like picking up a person's arm, like where you could wrap your hand around their entire arm and pull, and then like do some damage. But the giants aren't like that much bigger than humans. So let's say there's this guy, and maybe he's like kicking and screaming to try and get away, which I would hope you do, because that's like basic survival instinct. Let's say he's like wearing some sort of armor, some sort of segmented armor. And then we can give him like, because the armor would actually be kind of restricting in this example. That's not what armor looks like. So maybe he's got like his other leg. Oh yeah, and then notice how I drew some extra toes. So because humans, their psychology is definitely going to start malfunctioning a little bit whenever they turn into these other forms, then it's going to be, as time progresses, they're going to think of themselves as less and less human, which makes it more likely for errors to occur during the morphing process. That means that you can end up with some pretty non-baseline looking forms. And that's where kind of like that in the universe, the thing of like, oh, giants have extra limbs, they have like extra digits. That's where that comes from, at least in here. Now, real world, that comes from like more biblical narratives. It's like David and Goliath and like the giants and that stuff. But that's not what these guys are. These guys are humans who have like abandoned their humanity in favor of power. So maybe this guy he's not going to eat him. Like, they're not cannibals. Well, I guess some of them could be. For the most part, they're not. Only like they're really weirdos. Most of them are just people who use their abilities for like personal gain, like power and like taking over kingdoms. And again, since this guy is from the Middle Ages, he's not going to be too advanced. Now, in the future, what they can do is have them be in the future, I would imagine that they take like people's cars and like ruin their cars so they can't escape. Maybe they run like their own towns, like some sort of tyrant thing. And here can be some armor segments. Let's say the gauntlet is. So how would that be? That'd be like. Maybe this guy's got his hands tied up. Yeah, I'd figure you'd probably want to tie up somebody if you were going to capture them. Here, hold on. It just looks like he's stepping on him. I gotta redraw that a little bit. Maybe I'll draw the knight's visor first. Ooh, I'd imagine his hands would be tied behind his back. That would make more sense, probably. That's probably going to be like chainmail, actually. Yeah, he's going to be wearing chainmail. But yeah, so we'll say his hands are a little bit tied up at the moment. Since, but actually, though, like he's relatively incapacitated. Maybe he's like still trying to struggle, but yeah, he's defeated. He's gonna go back and like get interrogated or something. Man, if we want to make him look extra scary, maybe we'll give him like some little thingamabobs here, some little spikes. Yeah, so this guy's probably like struggling if he hasn't already been knocked out. Hold on, the proportions of that helmet aren't quite right. I don't think the proportions of any of this is quite right, but you know, that's how it goes sometimes. Then I imagine he's going to be tied up with some sort of cord. Oh, wait, I can make that cooler. Instead of having him be tied up with cord, have him be tied up with like chains or something. That could definitely improve the visual. I can make it more convincing for medieval times. I say more convincing as I'm out here drawing a virus mutated human who gained powers from a cosmic time traveler, dragging away a knight who served under a fictional legendary guy, King Arthur. So, you know, we're going for realism here. When I say King Arthur is fictional, yes, there is that whole discussion about was it based off a real guy. But I mean, like, fictional as in, like, Merlin and, like, that kind of stuff. Like I mean, modern fantasy interpretations of King Arthur. But, or in this case, King Archer, as he's going to be called. So yeah, there's maybe a giant from medieval times. Is how many? 5 toes and 1 thumb toe. Let's see if I can draw this foot correctly. I don't think there's really a correct way to draw it, considering that it's like this giant mutated guy, other than the fact that I definitely drew it wrong. So let me retry that. Hold on. The thumb toe would be on the other side. And then that would probably be like longer. Then that would probably be like, okay, whatever. Let me think what else. So we drew the patron and tenets of magic. We talked about there's the Biomystic Codex, which is like all the different powers. First, it was kind of experimenting with them one at a time. Then it was all of them at once, which caused total chaos. Then it got split up into different strains of magic flu. Okay, now hopefully I'll do another one talking about mages, because this one, this one didn't really, I didn't get to draw as many mages as I wanted to, because from the future, one of our protagonists, I had said the Baron, I never showed a picture of him, which was my bad. Here we go. Here's the Baron. So you can see he actually looks very similar to the Striped Man, probably some sort of way to pay homage to him. But yeah, you can see he's got like those insectoid wings, like dragonfly wings. And then we know we have that other mage drawn, the Aviator. This one doesn't fall into a neat category of giant or like winged humanoid. He's just a plane. So I guess arguably a winged. He's a winged. He's not humanoid in the sense that he has 2 arms and 2 legs and is bipedal. He's just a giant plane. But like here's another sketch of the Baron with some extra arms. So yeah, we will hopefully get to another stream, maybe cover more about mages. This was more of an information dump about magic, I guess. Wait, whoops, that's the wrong page. But if you want me to draw more things like this, but draw like an actual mage in a fighting scene where it's like an individual, not a humanoid looking one, not a human-esque one, but maybe like a crazy mutated one from the future, go ahead and comment. If you like this video, go ahead and like. Other than that, everybody, thank you for watching and have a great day or evening or whatever time it is for you. Have a good one.